So in this short series of videos, we're going to look at paint effects in Maya 2018 and using them in a couple of ways. Two things are important to think about. One is how we can use paint effects with mesh, for example, so the grass here in this area, and also how we can use paint effects and render with Arnold. It's nothing really fancy, but there are just a couple of things that have to be considered in order for it to actually work. And we have to remake a shader and maybe change the geometry a little bit just so it renders a little bit better. So why don't we just start with the idea of what paint effects is, because we're going to have to get into that for both of these things. We can also talk about making this sort of water shader here. It's nothing really fancy and it kind of looks crummy, but it's got an interesting way to use Arnold's transmission in the AI standard surface shader. Okay. Save this and open a new scene. So if you want to use the paint effects in Maya, you can access the different brushes or the different shapes that you can make through the Generate menu, which is under Modeling. So you can go to Get Brush, and you'll see that this opens the commonly available content browser, which can also be accessed through Windows General Editor's content browser. So we can get to it there too. But there is a section for paint effects here, and you can see you can create a wide variety of things with paint effects. The thing to be aware of with paint effects is this is pretty old Maya technology. It's been in there for a long time. There haven't been that many changes to it, other than a few updates a few years ago with occupation area, so it can sort of stick to objects or fill objects, which is kind of interesting. But we're going to look at just some basic uses, and you'll see some of the limitations of the geometry. It's not very high quality, and the textures are kind of crummy, and all that kind of stuff. But we can change some of these things. So let's start with something simple. What was that one that I was just showing you? I think it was birch. That was a birch tree. So if I take this birch, and then so you can see I've got a brush now. If I just click and drag and then release, it will grow one tree. If I kept painting, it would, this one's set just to grow one, I guess. Some of the brushes, if we go into grasses, for example, and we'll do this in a bit. If we grab grass clump, if I hold down B, left mouse drag and make my brush bigger, but you see as I brush, it will make more and more. So let me just close this. So when you create a paint effects object, it creates a transform node, just like everything else, so you can move it around. Also creates a stroke node. So when I was painting, so if I just launch this again and paint, I'm painting along a stroke. You can see there's a curve. Well, maybe you can't. There is a curve down here at the bottom, and it paints along the stroke. And some of the settings for paint effects can be found in that stroke, such as the display quality. A few basic things here. There are some interesting things. You can clip the stroke so you can actually make it shorter or bigger. We're not seeing it here. If we grabbed a different brush, there's some linear brushes, some brushes that are drawn along the stroke and some that are grown out of the stroke. So let's say here, so intestines, if we paint these, see this is one that is grown along the stroke. The tree is what's called a tube that grows out of the stroke. So the intestine here, I can animate something like the max and min clip, and you can actually animate the curve. There are lots of other things you can also do here, but let's not worry too much about this right now. I'm more interested in looking not at the stroke, but at the brush. So the Birch Spring Light one. So this is called the brush, and this is a mesh brush, so it's actually making a piece of geometry. And I don't want to get too lost in here, but there are things like the global scale, which is useful just for turning up everything, making everything bigger or smaller uniformly. Brush width, if there's when we saw the grass, the brush width means how far around the stroke it will draw. There are lots of other things in here. Let's just jump down to tubes. So creation, tubes per step. So this has got a very low tubes per step. That's why even when I did a long stroke, we only got one tree. You can randomize this. Segments is how refined it will be. So you can see as I turn this up, it's subdividing this even more. It changes the way the branches will grow out, things like that. Length min, length max. So this is sampling among a bunch of them all on the same stroke. This will be the variation of their length. Also, the same with their width. Whenever you see a 1 and 2, 1 means at the base, 2 means at the tip. You can randomize that and so on. You can draw a width scale as well, so if you wanted to have a certain profile shape. So the tube direction is most of the time going to grow along the normal, so out from the curve that you drew. Then there's elevation and azimuth, so this controls how much it's leaning over. So you can... So this is sort of spinning about its axis, I think. I don't really know. So elevation, you can make it lay down. Anyway, growth. So the whole analogy that's used for paint effects is plants. So even if you're doing a teapot, if I go into Windows, General Editor, Content Browser, and choose under, I guess, Fun Mesh probably, like a furry teapot. If I draw this, that is also using the same analogy of branches, twigs, leaves, flowers, and buds, but they're using it probably this is a bud, or this is a bud. The handle is probably a branch or something, or a leaf, I don't know. Anyway, just so you know, it's all built on the same analogy. It's more obvious, clearly, when you're actually making a tree. So if we go into the brush, if I turn off leaves, no more leaves, turn off the twigs, no more twigs, turn off branches. See, this one looks like most of the leaves are growing off twigs. So these are just subdivisions along, and you've got settings for each one, start branches, how often they split. So it's a procedurally generated tree structure. It's not constructed beautifully or anything, like the branches don't actually connect to the trunk and things like that. They intersect with it and they move with it, but there's no nice connection between them. And if you got up really close, you would see that it's just these planes or shapes that are stuck into each other. Leaves are usually just planes with an image of a leaf and an alpha cutout on them, and so on. So you can go through and look at all these things. One interesting thing that you can do with these, which can be kind of handy, so under this behavior menu, you can turn on turbulence. And so this one by default has tree wind turned on. So it doesn't always play. Okay, miraculously today it's playing. So you can see it's trying to make it seem like it's tree wind. So the trunk isn't really moving, but the branches and leaves are. There are different types of turbulence. There's grass wind, if you have a grass type. Paint effects, and then other types of things here. So this is kind of handy actually. And under generate here, there are some animation tools. So brush animation, you can force it to loop. So if you want something that you can just render at once and repeat over and over again. There are also things like brush springs, which will force the brush to react to transform forces. So if you animate it moving, then stop it suddenly, it can animate it as if it's responding to that force. Anyway, there are lots of things you can do. But let's look at what it takes to render this with Arnold. So if I put, let me just save my scene here. Not there. Not there. Why are you going there? So PFX demo. Okay, so if we put in an Arnold, we'll just put in a sky dome light Click render. We'll get nothing. That's because Arnold can't render paint effects. So why are we talking about this? Well, it can render paint effects if you convert it to a polygon. So we just want to select the brush, go to modify, convert, paint effects to polygons. Okay, so it gives us a problem. But even though this is a polygon now, it inherits that animation, which is also handy. And if we go to render, now it renders not nicely in any way, but it will render. It will cast shadows. So the problem is the shaders that it uses and the way it deals with textures. We've got to fix that. So it's not a big deal. Actually, this isn't a great tree to use because the tree is actually just a flat plane. I'm actually going to delete this tree and grab a different one. So I'll grab an oak tree because I know they've got some volume. Nothing too heavy. Oak medium. Let's try that. Okay, so that's pretty good. So now you can see this one actually has some shape. We still have to convert it to polygons. If you have lots of these can make your scene pretty heavy. Again, if we render this, it'll not be good. One thing is the specularity is turned way up and it's going to be super shiny, but we're just going to rebuild the shaders using the Arnold standard surface. So, okay, there's my birch. That's gone now, so let's delete that. So here in the hypershade, we've got the oak tree shader. It's a Fong shader. So let's map that out. Move this over. Yeah, so it's a Fong shader. We could switch this in here, but I'm just going to rebuild it. So you can see it has a TIFF image of oak bark. And it's going into a ramp, and then the out color is going into color. Why do they run it through a ramp? I don't know. I guess they are... Yeah, it's not even in the ramp. They're putting it into the color gain. There must be a reason for that. Maybe so they can use the ramp to change this, because this is going from gray to white. So it's probably changing the expression of this from the bottom to the top a little bit. So we can do that too. We're just going to copy what they have here. So we'll just do AI standard surface. And we can just pipe this ramp out color into our base color, right? Nothing fancy. And then I can just select the trunk and apply this to, oops, I'm probably off screen here. Sorry. So I just selected the trunk, right-clicked on the AI standard surface, and assign material to viewport selection, right? Good. So now let's look at the AI standard surface, and let's call this trunk shader. It's very specular. Let's turn that off, and let's just do a quick render to see what we're dealing with here. Right, so that's a bit better. Right, so it's kind of hard to see, so getting a bit closer here. Right, so it's kind of a wonky tree, but this texture is pretty good, and it's being repeated through here. The UVs of these are laid out nicely, so you could even swap in a different texture if you wanted to. So if we just look in the hypershade, this is just a file node, and we could replace it with any texture we wanted. So just as an example, I'm not going to bother because I don't want to lose what I've got here, but you could just swap in something else here. Arnold might want this to be raw. I'm not sure. Actually, that'll probably give us, yeah, it's kind of blown out. Okay. Should turn off my render here. Now you'll notice that it's really kind of jagged. Paint Effects is not meant to be the star of the show. It's meant to fill in the background, I think, most of the time. And so that's why you get some low resolution types of models. We can smooth this, of course. So we can smooth it just with the on-screen preview. And if we render it, it'll be better. Right, so that looks better already. If you don't want to have it smoothed on screen, of course, you can, just like any other Arnold, anything rendered with Arnold, you can go into the Object Shape node, scroll down to Arnold Subdivision, and turn on Cat Clark and maybe give it 2 subdivision. So now it's not smoothed on screen, but when I render it, it will be smooth, right? So that's good. Now, so that's dealt with. Now the leaves. So these are all one object together. And if we look at the oak leaves, they come in as a fong as well. We're going to do the same thing and rebuild this as a AI standard surface. Let's just name this leaf so we don't get mixed up here. And the same thing, it's a little more confusing. They have this oak leaf texture, and then they're running it through a reverse and then a multiply divide and putting that into specular color. So essentially what's happening is that they have an alpha channel around this leaf texture. So there's a part that is colored. Can we see it? Yeah. And then the cutout around it. And they don't want any specular to appear in the cutout area. They just want the specular to appear on the leaf. So they're taking out the alpha, they're reversing it. This multiply divide, I don't know, maybe it's making sure the numbers are positive, I guess. And then they are, or that doesn't make sense. I don't know what's going on here. And then it's going into specular color. So ultimately what they're trying to do is just make the specular highlights only on the part that has leaf texture on it and not the part that is transparent. Let's not worry about that too much. So we're just going to take their color ramp again and put it into our base color. And if we wanted to take, if that's what this is actually doing, this last multiply divide, we probably would put that in the specular weight. Oh, or maybe the specular color. Here, I don't know. Let's see. Let's put this on our leaves. Got the leaves selected. Right-click, assign material. Now, because there's a see-through component on this, we have to declare that these leaves are not opaque, and we do that in the shape node of the object. Under Arnold, turn off opaque. And let's see what happens if we render now. Let's save the file. Is that working? No, it's not. I forgot one step. So we have to get that cutout information, right? So here we see from the oak leaf TIFF going into the transparency of the original Fong shader. We have to do the same thing, but in our case, we take that out alpha from the leaf and pipe it into the opacity of the Arnold shader. Whoops. Sorry, let's make this a bit bigger. There might be a better way to do this, I don't know. But since out alpha is a single channel and opacity is a triple channel, we can just pipe this into each of the opacity red, green, and blue. And that should work. So that means now that the alpha channel is being cut out, and we know the non-leaf part should be transparent. So let's just take a picture so we can compare. Render again. You can already see that's better. You can see it's actually taking quite a bit of time to render here. It might be that these things are reflecting themselves. So we could turn off specularity because I don't think it's really doing that much. Let's see if that helps. Is that faster? It looks like it might be. So that took 9 seconds to render. I'm just going to change my render settings so we can see a little more clearly. Just going to turn off my auto detect threads, put -1 so it, or -2 so it saves 2 threads for me. What was I going to do? Oh yeah, and change the bucket size to 16. This just means it works on a smaller area. So we see these little things rushing around here, working away. You can see that's actually pretty good looking. I mean, to model this and set this up would be a huge pain. So if you need a tree to fill out, like an architectural rendering or something, this is actually pretty good. Yeah, so the trick is you just have to convert your paint effects to polygons, and then you'll probably have to rebuild your shaders. It's not hard, but it will work much better if you are using the Arnold shaders. Alright, we'll come back and we'll look at using mesh with a paint effects object.